True Wealth Spotlight, episode 38. Hello and welcome to this episode of the True Wealth Spotlight. My name is Cassie Lehman, and this is the podcast dedicated to helping you discover true wealth at the intersection of faith, finances, and family values. Today, our guest is Victoria Cobb. She is the president of the Family Foundation, which is Virginia's largest and oldest pro-family organization. So as you know, January is a month that's really dedicated to the pro-life movement. It includes important days like Sanctity of Life Sunday and the March for Life in Washington, D.C. Now, the Family Foundation is an organization that's dedicated to advocating for conservative values and holding elected officials accountable through recording public hearings, legislative report cards, voter guides, grassroots activism, and really much, much more. In her role as president, Victoria maintains the vision and the mission of the organization. She's also the organization's spokesperson, and she is in demand as a speaker and a commentator on family issues in the media. And she has been with the Family Foundation since the year 2000. And I am really glad to know Victoria because I think she brings a lot of clarity to the political issues of the day when it's often hard to figure out what's true and what is fake news. So before we get started, I just want to share that this podcast is brought to you by Beacon Wealth Consultants, our wealth management firm that specializes in biblically responsible investing. And you can find out more at beaconwealth.com. Now, please welcome Victoria Cobb to the podcast. Hello, everyone. I just want to welcome today Victoria Cobb to a conversation about pro-life and what's happening this very special month of January. We have Sanctity of Life Sunday. We have the March for Life. So we have a lot of big things coming up. So our guest today is Victoria Cobb. She's the president of the Family Foundation of Virginia. She's a very good friend of ours at Beacon Wealth Consultants. And so, Victoria, first of all, you are super busy. I'm so happy that you have the time to join us today and made the time.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be able to chat with you all. This is a big month on the life issue. There's a lot going on.
Right. So the Family Foundation that Victoria is the president of is located in Virginia, but there are organizations in many states. But can you just talk briefly about the Family Foundation and what you do?
Sure. I mean, our focus is to ensure that our faith is a part of the democracy, the process that we use in public policy, and that we simply want to help our government make good decisions that help families thrive. And so that starts obviously with the right to life. That has to be the first place that starts. And then we do a broad array of other things dealing with family structure and how important marriage is. And we do things with parenting and making sure that our laws actually help parents, not step in between a parent and a child when government sees things differently. So, I mean, kind of a wide array of those type of issues. But again, it starts with human life. If you don't have the right to life, it's hard to get to any of these other issues.
Right. So some I mentioned in the beginning. So we think of January, we have Sanctity of Life Sunday, which is on the 19th of January. So those of you who are attending church on a regular basis probably know about that. And the March for Life in Washington, D.C., we have coming up on the 24th of January. And if you are living in Virginia, February 13th is the Virginia March for Life. So these are all really big things that are happening. And sometimes I think we might get discouraged when we listen to the news. And if we are conservative in our views, we just might feel like we're in a losing battle. And so I'm wondering if you can just talk about some encouraging words for us around the pro-life movement and some changes that are happening.
There are actually a lot of things about which to be encouraged. In Virginia, we've had some tough elections. We know some of our climate for life is going to change. So in our state, we've been particularly discouraged since November about what's about to occur when our General Assembly gets into session. And that may be true in many other states, depending on kind of what the scenario is. I mean, there's also states that you look at their situation and you just think, wow, I mean, their pro-life laws have just every year gotten better and better. So it really depends around the country, kind of what your state looks like, how you're feeling. But I will tell you, nationally, there's so much to be encouraged. The abortion rate at the national level is and has been kind of on a constant slow decline, a little bit more so in recent years. Certainly when we go all the way back to the abortion rates when Roe, we're talking about this anniversary coming up in January, certainly it has been on a great decline compared to those numbers back in the day. And in Virginia, even where we're discouraged about what the future might look like, our own abortion rate has dropped 42% in the last 5 years. That is unbelievable. And it is the result of some really incredible pro-life laws. Now, law is not everything, right? So there's law and hearts and minds, and we have to look at both. Since we're a public policy organization, sometimes we focus on law, sometimes we think, it is only because we passed these great clinic safety regulations and we got women allowed to see their ultrasound, which we think is tremendously important. But it's also the hearts and minds. Some of the things that are affecting it are the fact that the pregnancy resource centers are all across our country. More and more of them are opening. So there's more support available to women. The thing to be encouraged about is that overall, women do not want to take the life of their unborn child. That's not our instinct. That's not how God created us. And we're creating more pockets of support that enable women to make better choices. That is pretty awesome. I mean, the number of pregnancy care centers so far exceed the number of abortion clinics that women really, it's more accessible to actually get support than it is to actually go and take the life of your child. That's the kind of country we want to live in, and we're getting there, right? It's not overnight. It's not all, these big, let's just overturn Roe. There's a lot more to it, but that kind of stuff actually is extremely encouraging, and people should feel excited. And if you look at the polling about how people feel about abortion, we are slowly changing this back towards a culture of life. The younger generations have seen the 4D ultrasound. They now know this is no longer described as a blob of tissue, which was always kind of a stunner for those of us that it's a matter of faith, and then we see the science and we can't comprehend this sort of concept that was sort of really the premise of Roe. Legally, I don't think we'd be where we are today if the science had been where it is today back in 1973. But I think the younger generation sees that. They've experienced the fact that their parents have had abortions, so they know their moms sometimes have aborted siblings, and there's sort of a feeling that goes with that sort of says, why them, not me, and is life that expendable? So there's just a lot that's happening, and people are, in fact, I think, making small moves towards really a culture that ultimately we hope will not allow for abortion except in cases of life of the mother and so forth. But it's a slow move. So it starts with people saying, we believe there should be a limit. There should be a point at which in pregnancy we all acknowledge, because we can see this child, we can watch it move, we can, it can be born outside of the womb at 22 weeks now. I mean, yes, that's a challenging situation, but when viability continues to backtrack, we have to kind of, as a society, we're kind of going, yeah, there is a point. So there may be people who are not as pro-life as I am. They don't believe that the moment an unborn child is conceived, that life should be protected, but they definitely are on board at a certain point. So our job is just to keep moving that needle a little bit further, and I believe that's happening. So much to be encouraged about, even though, you can read one news headline or see your state do something very frustrating. Obviously in Virginia, last year we had first a bill that allowed abortion on demand up until like the point of birth, and even still we had a governor make a worse statement about allowing infanticide. So we had a lot to be very discouraged about, but those are moments, those are flashpoints. That's not the overall trend.
Wow, thank you. That is encouraging, because sometimes we just feel like we don't see the good news. We just see the bad news. So I'm going to ask you a question about the Equal Rights Amendment. So as a woman, really, I think people assume that this is just all about things like equal pay. Like women should get equal pay and have equal opportunity. But there is this tie to the pro-life movement or to abortion. And can you just talk about that piece of the ERA, and so we have a little bit better understanding of that and the impact of it?
Yes, and this is something, if you're in Virginia, you're hearing a lot about it, or in a state that has the potential to still ratify the ERA, you're hearing a lot about it. If you're anywhere in the country, you may be hearing more and more about it soon, because the process is moving along. But just a 2-second summary so people kind of catch up to where we are. If this is ringing a bell, but you're kind of foggy and you're thinking, wasn't that a thing in the 70s? Yes, it was. And in fact, it is outdated. And in fact, it is dead and should be null and void. But essentially, despite the fact that there was this idea in the 70s that we needed to have a U.S. constitutional amendment that ensured that there were equal rights for women, in order to do that, you need to have 38 states ratify that amendment. So your state legislatures make a decision, and then we move from there. And there was a deadline set. The deadline was even extended. And ultimately, there were not 38 states. And in fact, there were states that actually rescinded. So they said, yes, let's go forward. Then they realized there was a tie to abortion. I'm going to talk about that. And they actually backtracked. And so there's not even actually 37 states right now. But if you read in the news, all you'll hear is we're waiting for the 38 states, decades and decades later. So why is this back? Why are we hearing about it? This amendment is not coming back because there's an all of a sudden a realization that women's rights haven't progressed, that we don't have equal pay laws. In fact, in nearly every state, you have a lot of state laws around this equality issue with women. So there's so many laws that say we're not going to discriminate by sex is in that language. And you have all these unique laws that are just about making sure things like pay and housing and hiring make sure that men and women are treated equally. And then at the federal level, we have a lot of those federal laws. So there's not, supporters of the Equal Rights Amendment aren't pushing it because there's a gap in the law that they're pointing to and saying, we need this. It's more of a concept. They say, look, women need their fair share, like we're not in the US Constitution. How can we be in the, the 21st century and not have women in the Constitution? Now, Supreme Court has made it very clear, actually, that the 5th, the 14th, there are certain amendments that absolutely have been declared. These apply to women. They have every right known to men. It just doesn't say it specifically. And so other folks say, well, what's the big deal? Then why don't we just say it? And if it were that simple, I think everybody actually would be on board. That makes perfect sense. But what was figured out in the 70s and now is still true of today, because remember, the language has not changed. You can't change the language. So we're still talking about very outdated language. And what was true in the 70s, and Phyllis Schlafly of Eagle Forum kind of became the symbolic head of the movement against it, is that there's this concept in the wording. And it's not simply saying that women deserve equal dignity and rights. It's actually saying that we need to treat men and women the same, is the way it plays out. That basically we have to be the same in order to have equal rights and equal dignity. And there are real impacts of that. And one of the ones that was determined in the 70s that is absolutely still true today, and now we've had state court decisions that have validated it, is the fact that abortion, if men and women need to be the same to be treated with equal dignity and worth, then what we're really talking about here is ensuring, for example, one of the differences that happen between men and women is pregnancy. And so to ensure that women can actually be the same, we can't have situations where women could be pregnant and not take the life of their unborn child. That is the concept that the court embraced, and it was theoretical when they were talking about in the 70s. But what actually happened is certain states took this language and added it to their state constitutions. And so then you see it litigated in states. And in fact, there are several states, New Mexico, Connecticut in particular, that took this language and said, yes, not only do we have to have legal abortion now, according to our state constitution, but we need to pay for it with taxpayer dollars because this is a matter of equality. And in other cases, it was sort of, part of the legal discussion was also sort of this idea that, well, we pay for certain surgeries for men. So this just kind of fits in that box. So the concern now is that if we do, in fact, have a a ratification process of the original U.S. constitutional amendment, and we somehow, the courts determined that the deadline doesn't matter for some reason, and that 38 states actually have ratified, and these states that rescinded somehow don't count as rescinding. So there's a lot of legal craziness to come up with the concept that we could get to the U.S. Constitution. But if that were to happen, and the Equal Rights Amendment went onto the U.S. Constitution, it would be very difficult to believe that we wouldn't end up with a situation where at the U.S. constitutional level, we've now created in our Constitution a right to abortion. Now, some people go, what's the big deal? Roe's legal anyway. Keep in mind, though, if you look at the legal scholarship around the decision of Roe, it's decided not grounded in our Constitution. They'll talk about the emanations of the penumbra, right? Like, so it's like a legal theory that came out of things, but it doesn't have solid constitutional grounding, which is why we believe it can be undone. If you put the Equal Rights Amendment, you've just given it like an extra foundation, and it's like the reverse of everything we've been fighting to do in the pro-life movement. And the challenge, and this is really what it's about, because that's why the Equal Rights Amendment is coming back, that's why it's back to popular, is because in one foul swoop, at the US level, you then sort of solidify abortion. They're getting very concerned about all the state laws that have gone pro-life. They're very concerned about the state of the US Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. Now, the tricky part is the Supreme Court still has to, their job is to interpret the US Constitution. So the problem is, even if you get 5 pro-life justices that would overturn Roe, if you hand them something else into the US Constitution, it gets much more difficult. They can't just because they believe it in their heart. Their job is to, right, we want original, justices, people who care about original intent, people who read the Constitution for what it is. And so it gets harder and harder to then roll back the tide of abortion on demand, taxpayer funding for abortion, the whole 9 yards. So that is one of the big pushes about the Equal Rights Amendment. That's why it's a big deal. That's why it's going to be a massive showdown in Virginia, this General Assembly session, which starts next week. And should we ratify it, which is very possible, they will claim that we are the 38th state. I would argue they'll be wrong. And good news is there is a lawsuit already started. Thankful to 3 states that stepped forward, who said a couple of them had rescinded, and they're saying, wait, this isn't real. You got to stop this thing. We're not on this thing. And some states who aren't yet in the posture of having ratified it, but don't think that it's legit, don't want to put on their state when it goes in the U.S. Constitution. So there's actually a lawsuit that was filed, I guess it was about last week, about a little tiny bit before Christmas maybe. And so that's the first of, I can't even tell you how many lawsuits are going to happen when this occurs, but it matters, right? So there's a reason that it will kind of get tied up in litigation, because it's an end game for them. It's a big push, and our job is to simply say, 1, states shouldn't ratify it. 2, there aren't 38 and shouldn't be 38 unless you get a whole lot more states. And then 3, once that happens, we're going to say, it's not legitimate, and work our way with the courts and make sure that they kind of uphold this original deadline that's passed. And there's just so much at play. But thank you for bringing that up, because pro-lifers do need to understand it sounds so right and good. And there's actually 100 other things wrong with it that are embedded in this idea of sameness. But on the life issue, that's the big one.
Oh, well, Victoria, you're able to summarize things, and sometimes you get just sidetracked by news. And so just to kind of give us the highlights, it's really great. I appreciate that. So in the beginning, you were talking about, we're moving the needle a little bit by little bit. So what can I as an individual do to be a part of that, right? We want to be contributing. We want to take an active role. What are some things that I can be thinking about as an individual around the pro-life movement to have some sort of impact?
Absolutely. And there are a lot of things and a lot of different things. So, of course, the public policy person in me starts with, please have a relationship with your legislators. Please send them emails. Be connected to both a state group and a federal group that feeds you very accurate and timely information. so that you know when your voice needs to be heard and matters, right? So one of the things we do at the Family Foundation, for example, is people give us their email, they give us their cell phone numbers for texting, and when a bill is moving forward that their legislators will vote on, our job is to say, now is when we need the email, now is when we need you to direct tweet them, now is when, visit their Facebook page, really simple things that people are doing in other areas of their life, particularly on the social media side, that can really make an impact. And at the state level, I assume most states are pretty similar to Virginia. And at the state level, they don't need a ton of emails. I mean, I'm talking 10, 15 emails get on the radar of the aide of the state legislator, which will get put in front of him or her, and will really kind of make them think twice about how important this bill is and what people care about. So that's important. And associated with that is prayer around what happens at your state legislature, prayer around the U.S. Supreme Court and decisions they need to make. They've got a case coming up with dealing with a Louisiana law, where Louisiana simply said, if you're going to have an abortion facility, that facility needs to have the ability to transfer patients that have complications over to a hospital. It's called admitting privileges. And that law has been challenged on the idea that that's almost sort of undoable for clinics, that they will limit access to abortion because they want to be able to operate without any connection to hospitals. And so it's getting challenged. It's been accepted to be heard at the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's, for example, something that we need to be praying around, this Louisiana law on the case and the Supreme Court justices that will hear it and those preparing. So there's a lot kind of at that level. And then there's the practical, right? So the first practical, more hands-on, less public policy is, what are you doing to support efforts to help women who find themselves in these pregnancy situations that they weren't planning on, that they don't have the right support around? So that can be anything from financial support to your pregnancy center, or volunteering, or just making sure your church is zoned in to both the things that the pregnancy center needs. We want your church to be zoned into all these marches, for example. I mean, your church should be taking a bus to the National March for Life. And definitely, if your state has a March for Life, that should be even closer to you. So like ours is in Richmond at February 13th. If you're a church in Virginia, and that's what you should be doing, is bringing some folks down to Richmond. These things make a difference. Legislators are impacted by the volume. Remember, they're put in office by voters. When they see a lot of voters, especially at these marches, they realize they're going to have to pay attention to this issue. In Virginia, we had the first March for Life ever last year. 7,000 Virginians came to the Capitol. That's the largest number that's come to the Capitol for anything ever. The only thing that came close was when Franklin Graham came and used the Capitol grounds to kind of preach. That was memorable and huge. This is the only public policy kind of event that's ever been like that. You better believe that made waves. It caught media attention. It caught legislators by surprise, and it helps set a tone. So we're going to come back again this year. Your state, if you're somewhere else, may have one of these. So there's sort of how do you get involved church-wise, in your prayer life, in your support life. And there's one more thing that I think can't be overlooked, which is being brave. And I don't mean like, I'm going to go march and be brave that way. I mean, our friends and neighbors need to hear common sense conversation around these topics. So, we were always taught, don't talk about politics, and these days it's so divisive. But there are a lot of ways to talk about the life issue in a way that helps take down people's defenses, pulls it outside of the political battle over it, and just talking about the value of the unborn and how much we love embracing women that have needs that, it's important to not just dodge the issue because it's hard. It is hard, and we need to be super sensitive. All around us are people who are post-abortive. They are struggling. As I told you, it's not our natural instinct. God did not give us an instinct to say, let's take the life of our child. There's something that happens that hurts after that happens. And so we have to be sensitive about how we talk about it, but it can't just be ignored. The other side doesn't ignore their issues. They push, push, push. And when they do that, they move the cultural needle in their direction. And we have the stronger arguments. We have the science behind us on this. We have our faith behind us on this. And honestly, there are people all around you struggling with these actual decisions in their own lives. I was just hit with, I had a high school friend reach back out to me after all these years. We were just connected on Facebook, have not seen this person in, we won't say how many years because then you'll know how old I am, but you know, a long time. And she reached back out to me because she was in an unplanned pregnancy. Now, thankfully, she reached out to me. If someone reaches out to me about abortion, they know they want to, I know they want to keep that baby and they want someone to back them up. And I think that's actually the situation in so many cases where women find themselves in crisis pregnancies. They want someone to come alongside and say, there is support available. We can help you through this. In my friend's case, it was, you know, the boyfriend's pressuring for an abortion. Financially, they cannot afford it, the whole 9 yards. And that is not an unusual scenario. And our job is to say, what can I do to help? And in my case, this person doesn't even live in my state, but I know where the pregnancy center is. I could get her into an appointment. She got to see her unborn child on an ultrasound, and she's walking it out. And it is not easy. But all of us have opportunities we don't even realize, people that are in our lives. So just having the brave spirit to say, I'm willing to have these conversations. I'm willing to be a support to people who are making these decisions. There's just a lot of ways to be pro-life, and it's not just all the marches and all the emails. It's all of the above, and anything that you find could be helpful towards the pro-life cause.
So I would be remiss to wrap up with a question about investments. So, one of the things that's really important to us at Beacon Wealth Consultants is that we are not supporting any kind of companies that are participating in the abortion industry. And that also includes companies that contribute to Planned Parenthood, who is one of the biggest producers of abortion, or providers of abortions. And so just share with me, if someone said, hey, you know, is it really even important for me to be thinking about my investments and how I am supporting this industry? Does it really matter? I mean, what would you say to them?
I would say that in so many things in life, money is the driver. We don't like to think about that as, you know, if you're a faith-filled person, you know, you don't want money to be the thing that drives your life, right? But we're talking about companies and industries. Abortion is not, despite the way they frame it as healthcare, it is an industry. It is a economically driven decision. Decisions are made by groups like Planned Parenthood all around the money of it. And this becomes really clear when you actually just watch the fight over taxpayer funding of abortion. Those US dollars that we give to our taxes, which is so painful because we can't not, but that fight, you can watch the industry and their reaction when that is threatened at the state or federal level. You know how important money is to that industry. So it doesn't change when it's private companies giving money to Planned Parenthood. It is still critically important that they get those dollars, because those dollars drive their marketing in particular and their political decisions. So technically you'd argue, okay, well, you know, one's supposed to be a company, one's supposed to be a PAC, you know, where they give to candidates. I'm telling you, the separation is very slim, and companies give to both in some cases. Sometimes they give to the political arm, sometimes they give to the marketing arm, but I'm telling you, all of it drives, so it can affect who we get as elected officials. Because I will tell you, in Virginia, Emily's List, which is the leading pro-abortion PAC, they put so much money in our state elections this year, and it, no question, without a doubt, was the deciding factor in some of our House races in particular. Especially state races, because they aren't decided by that much money in many cases. The abortion industry having those political dollars and then what that gave them was the ability to put staff on the ground, to be knocking doors, to be out there with signage. I'm telling you, it makes a difference on the political side. Then on the marketing side, that's what they do with a lot of the state dollars, that the tax dollars that they get, and these private dollars that come through companies. And it's, you know, let's start their big thing right now is sex education and marketing that to schools so that they're getting at your young people. That's where those dollars go. So even though investing or purchasing from companies in some cases doesn't seem like a big decision, like, oh, I have a small amount of money in the scheme of whatever. Every little dollar does matter, and our hearts matter. And I think God wants to see us care enough about the things that he cares about to try to make our decisions align with where he calls us to be faithful. And so it absolutely is something that people need to think about, look into, rely on biblically responsible investing firms like Beacon Wealth to help them work through the ins and outs. Because I agree, there's some work involved to know what these companies are, but if you can have a team behind you that can tell you what that stuff is, then you don't have to work as hard yourself. You just have to be faithful with the results of what they find as far as where we should be putting our investment dollars.
Yeah. Victoria, thanks for this today. I think you have right well. You've given us things to think about in this moment where we're really focused on pro-life issues. And just tell us, if people want to learn more about the Family Foundation, how can you do that?
Sure. Our website's just familyfoundation.org. We're also on Facebook, just, great way to connect on what the activities are and that kind of thing. We're less frequent on Twitter, but you can get little things out from Twitter. Really the most important thing is probably, starting at the website and signing up for email alerts, because that's really where we inform people, right? So yes, it gets to our website, a lot of that stuff, but I would say that's the timely information. And if you're in other states, generically, we're called a Family Policy Council, and there are about 40 of them. So most states have them. So, hunt down your Family Policy Council for whatever state by Google, and you'll be able to kind of connect with them, and they'll keep you up to date.
Great. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Take good care.
Bye-bye.